People who were in a coma. What change surprised you when you woke up? So, I was in a coma for 4 days. When I woke up, everyone was talking about the baby boy I had. I had lost my long-term memory and didn't even remember being pregnant. My son was at the children's hospital in the NICU. I delivered him via C-section at 29 weeks. And all this was due to me having Crohn's disease. I found out after I woke up, my colon had ruptured during my pregnancy. My husband said I was talking like a child when I first woke up. When I first woke, I felt super tired, but then the next few days kind of restless. I remember one conversation my mom had with a nurse while I was under, and after a couple of days, I got my long-term memory back and remembered everything up until my second surgery, then nothing until I woke up. My son was my third surgery. Next story. Back in the 90s, my great-grandfather, he had a stroke. He was in a coma for 3 weeks, and when he woke up, he could not speak English. All he could speak was the Choctaw language. He had learned it when he was a kid because his family lived right near a Choctaw reserve, and he played with a lot of those kids. He spoke it fluently at the time, but forgot it over his life to where he couldn't remember any of it by this time. So this went on around for 10 days, and then he woke up from a night's sleep and could suddenly speak only English again, not remembering a word of Choctaw. He was also able to repeat verbatim every conversation that had been held in the room that he was in. Next story. I was in a coma for 9 days. When I woke up, I was still on a ventilator, and when they took me off the ventilator, my body didn't remember how to breathe on its own. I literally had to relearn how to breathe. Took me a few days, and I had no natural sense for how long or deeply to inhale, how long to hold it, how long to exhale. I had to put all my mental focus towards breathing. It was really weird. Edit. Okay, so for all the people wondering how I slept, I didn't for the first couple of days. If I dozed off, my blood O2 monitor would start beeping and wake me up. Then a nurse would yell at me from across the ICU to remember to breathe. And I couldn't talk because I'd had the tubes down my nose and throat, but I remember one time I woke up really exhausted to that damn beeping. So I started focusing on breathing again, but I was really angry about it. And my nurse came over yelling at me to breathe, and I glared at her and screamed in my non-existent voice, "I am!" And she must have read my lips and felt the rage because she just put her hands up and said, all right, good job," and then walked away. Anyway, shared that because I've never had the opportunity to before. My ability to breathe normally was back within a month or so, and my health is good nowadays, so I wouldn't say it had any permanent effects. Next story. My mom, she was induced in a coma for 3 months. When she woke up, she thought the hospital was trying to kill her. She tried to get out of bed and she fell on the floor because she could not walk. She was mostly freaked out about how her feet had lost their form, and they were humped over from not being used. Every muscle she had to learn again to use. She couldn't talk well or write at all. She had different handwriting after relearning. She said she hated how perfect her hands looked. Her nails and cuticles were perfect and clean from not being used. And I remember trying to brush her hair after she woke up. Almost all of it fell out. She almost died pretty much every day she was in her coma. You see, she had sepsis from a diverticulitis surgery gone wrong. A lot of her hair has grown back, and she can walk, but has brain damage that makes her seem very drunk. She is always dizzy. But it's been 5 years now, and her recovery has been miraculous. Edit. Thank you everyone so much for the love. I can't wait to tell her of all the people here who are rooting for her. She's going to be so happy. Thank you. And it's also going to be good for her to hear how much of you went through similar things and ended up with brain damage. She won't feel so alone. I truly thank each and every one of you for your comments. Much love to everybody. Next story. A good friend of our family went into a coma for half a year. Finally, when he woke up, he was stunned why his wife looked so old. He actually lost the last 15 years of his memory. He knew he had 2 children, but they were babies, and he didn't even know about his 3rd child. And the memory never came back. He skipped from no mobile phones to smartphones, the laptops. Everything was new to him. Being stuck in the early 90s, but actually being in the 2000s, there was a lot of change to handle. But learning you missed all your children growing up, that was the hardest for him. Next story. My wife was in a coma, 2 weeks medically induced. When she woke up, she had very wrong memories. They were all based on conversations people had while in the room with her. For example, she thought they flew her to Washington, D.C. for treatment. While she was in a coma, my father-in-law mentioned how he just flew back into town from D.C. on a work trip. Somehow, she overheard this while out, and her brain interpreted it to mean she flew to D.C. Even after we explained to her the reality of where she was, it took days for her to come to terms with reality. By the way, she was in a coma about 10 years ago, but she's not currently in one now. Next story. So, my stepdad was in a coma/ICU for about 3 weeks. Woke up and he couldn't find his teeth. We looked for a week, completely forgot where we put them. Then he dropped dead at the bathroom sink in the hospital, out of nowhere. They revived him, couldn't figure out why he could barely breathe. Then the hospital sat us down and showed us the x-rays with his dentures in his body. They forgot to take him out when they put the tubes in his mouth, blocking his air pipes or whatever. So yeah, we found them though. All right, everybody. So first off, I don't think I've ever done a coma video before, so this might be depressing. The guy who forgot his children. That's sad, but as for this story, what do you do there? Do you poop them out? Do you cut them open? Oh my God, your teeth are inside of you. That feels so weird. Oh, I don't like that thought. Anyway, next story. So, my wife was in a medically induced coma for 4 days. She had a reaction to contrast to die, and her heart stopped for 20 minutes. For nearly 3 months, she was confabulating about her long-dead parents. She would speak about them like they were in the next room. Or she would say her daughter or brother called, but they hadn't. Over and over, she thought her mom was alive, then her dad. It drove me crazy having to gently correct her many times per day. She would come up with amazing tales about what people, relatives, friends, neighbors were doing. What they said, truly creative fiction. 3 months later, she began to come back. The confabulation stopped. Now things are reversed. She can remember recent events, but her long-term memories are gone. I don't know what that's like, but it must be awful. She cries sometimes for her lost memories, but overall, she is doing very well. Next story. About 20 years ago, my cousin had a severe head injury from a fall. He was about 20 at the time and was in a coma for 4 weeks. When he woke up, he fairly quickly discovered that his memory was eidetic. He could repeat entire conversations back, word for word, and even tell you the date and time you said something. Also, he could memorize images with just a few seconds glance. His memory is still eidetic today, and it's annoying as F. Whenever he reminds me of something I said in the past, usually something I can't even remember, I suggest that we hit him in the head again. Next story. Medically induced for approximately a week due to sepsis. So, when I was in, I thought I was a bird with my wings outstretched and that was slowly freezing to the ground. When I woke up, I thought I was in Taos, but it looked like Raton. I was in Albuquerque in a hospital that I had worked in for years. I thought I was 10 years younger. I thought I had gotten into a wreck and my fiancé at the time was an abusive ex-boyfriend. I thought my fiancé had found me naked on the side of I-25 and had taken me to a veterinary hospital. It took another month and a half for me to understand what happened. I was in and out of surgery and died a couple of times in that time. Once they were changing out my wound vac and I looked down and I saw inside of me. Then things started making a little more sense, and I still can't eat cheeseburgers. Next story. I was in a coma for 2 days, not medically induced, woke up utterly confused at the time and day, didn't know if it was morning, evening, what day of the week, couldn't believe where and what time it was, and I was very agitated too. Had vague memories of what happened before it all went black, but they were very confusing and erratic ones. Turned on my computer to check the date and time, realized I'd missed an exam and that a whole 2 days had passed without my knowledge and freaked out about that. I frantically charged my phone to check for messages, and my absence mostly went unnoticed, and I felt extremely lucky. Then relieved, then sad, and started bawling uncontrollably. Edit. Also, I should have mentioned this was a hypoglycemic coma. I didn't just open my eyes and plop, I'm back on my feet and I'm freaking out. My first memory of easing back into consciousness is of me rocking back and forth in a fetal position on the bathroom countertop while eating an apple. Then some time passed by and I later regained consciousness, but this time lying on the floor. I don't recall how I got the apple or to the countertop or back to the floor, but as my mind started working again, I was distressed and extremely agitated. Next story. A guy I dated for a few weeks in high school was standing at a bus stop when I was driving back to my old hometown to visit my parents. I waved at him and he just looked bewildered, so I messaged him on Facebook just to be nice. It turns out that he had no idea who I was because he'd been in a car accident and a nearly half-year coma. He somehow woke up with a Scottish accent and had to relearn to walk, and his family finally figured out that the Scottish accent was because his ultra-Scottish grandma was with him a lot as a baby, and I guess that's what his brain latched onto. He's now a happy Ren Fair performer who used to be a very troubled guy headed for military service. I guess he's happier, but it really makes you wonder who he would have become. He also kept asking me if I knew why he wore this specific ring, and unfortunately, I did not. Next story. I had a skull fracture at 9 years old. When I finally, fully came out of the coma, I couldn't speak. I could not walk, I could not tell when I had to pee, and I cried a lot. It took a month to regain the ability to walk, which was my condition to be released. Talking came back more easily, and the bedwetting was beaten back in a couple of weeks. I was also on anti-seizure medications for 8 years. I don't remember any of my childhood except from photos post-accident. I remember some things, but I was a weird kid, and man, I'm crying now. I don't cry so easily these days. Long term, I graduated from a university with a degree in anthropology, got an MBA, started multiple small businesses. A couple were a little successful, struggle with emotions, maybe more than most, was addicted to alcohol and cigarettes for 20 plus years. I quit both in July. I look normal, feel like I'm weird still, and I'm complicated to others, but feel quite great about my ability to contribute and be a team player. I'm single though, unmarried, cry noticeably out of my right eye when I eat something hot in temperature, not spicy, and I have my other quirks. Alcohol effed me up a lot with depression, and wished I had a therapist earlier in my life. I'm moving today because I'm a broke 45-year-old with a great heart that feels unwanted by society's norms. Next story. Was in a coma for one day, and I don't remember anything from the day before to 2 weeks later. I think the thing that surprised me over and over again was the staples on my pubes. Something almost took my wing off and stabbed into my pubes, so they stapled the wound shut. But because my memory was effed, it took me a few days to not be surprised every time I went for a piss. There was a lot of surprises, actually. I was in a hospital one state over from where I lived. I couldn't remember where I live in my home state. I thought I was still in college after having graduated 2 years previous, not only being in a wheelchair, but having to be strapped down in my bed at night. Memory was complete crap. Double vision due to a cranial nerve palsy was surprising. The whole thing sucked, and I was ready to leave the hospital. It was also surprising how much harder life was/is outside of the brain injury hospital when I was doing so well in the hospital compared to the other patients in the ward. Surprised me how impatient people are with people who have invisible injuries. All in all, to be honest, it effing sucks, and don't do it. I enjoyed the company of my inpatient therapists, though. Next story. You and the people around you, they change. A lot. I had a narcissistic sister, and mom and dad used to fight on the most trivial stuff, lots of raised voices. I bet that's why my sister behaved the way she did. She was sarcastic too, it never ended. Going home just felt like a room to take a bath in and hit the sack at, with a touch of sarcasm and constant entitledness, if that's even a word. And as for me, I had a brain surgery. I was under for 5 months. The lobby lady told me she was there every day, never missed a day. There was no need to come visit me, but she would stay there after school till night fell, so like 5 hours. And I never felt so loved, ever. It swept the ground from under my feet. I was blank. When I did wake up, she was the first thing I saw. There she was, my sister, who always hated my guts. And I don't know what made her change. I never asked, but I was glad. I knew it was genuine. She wasn't even surprised. She just looks at me and says, "Took you long enough." And we cried and we hugged it out. And she was a completely different person after that. I don't know what it does to/in people that changes them, but I'm glad that it does. Then I realized why people just didn't get up from a bedridden state and need help, because the back is stiff. Next story. I was in a coma for almost 2 weeks. Things that surprised me was the personality change. I went from a meek sweetheart per my husband to a total raging B-word. This lasted a couple of weeks while in the hospital. Like, if you've ever been in a hospital or nursing home, there is always one patient screaming at the top of their lungs. Yeah, that was me. I yelled at everyone nearby, and oh, my poor nurses. One nurse actually threatened me because I was just that bad to him. Then, the second thing, I was surprised how quickly your body deteriorates while bedbound. I went from relatively strong to not being able to sit on the edge of a bed without someone holding me up. I was like a sack of potatoes, not to mention bed sores. I had no idea they could happen that fast. Next story. I was in a coma for a week. When I woke up, I couldn't believe that I slept for a week, and it bothered me, like something awful that I couldn't remember anything about that week. I kept checking the date online and on my cell phone and on an actual calendar and couldn't get over the fact that I was asleep for a whole week. I got the feeling that I died for 7 days and was fortunate to wake up from the dead. My son worried that I might have lost some mental functions and insisted that I take an online IQ test to see if I lost anything, and I didn't. Next story. 1. That I was alive for half a second. 2. Where am I? 3. The effing headache. 4. The mother effing headache. 5. The effing noise. Why is everything so damn loud? 6. Make it stop, please. 7. Is someone stabbing me in my ear? I almost needed a cone of shame to stop my effing ear, or just my right ear from hurting. 8. Ringing in my ears. Everything is so effing loud. 9. I am planning the murder of my hospital roommate right now. 10. I'm ripping the door off its hinges right now this effing second. 11. In my case, I have 2 memories. Waking up and then not much between then and transfer to rehab, but my family told me stories that filled in that gap. B. My second memory starts in the short bus from the hospital to the rehab. The effing rail and in and out of the bus squeaked as we drove, and I just screamed at the driver about it for 3 hours. I had a head injury, breaking the occipital lobe of my cranium, the only bone I've ever broken. It was broken 4 times in my life, but this was the worst one. The part of that cranial bone that broke came out of my inner ear, causing blood to come out of the inner ear and flap off scar tissue to sit, to this day, on my eardrum, causing tinnitus. Saved by Eagle Scouts, I coached young cycling athletes for years with medical badges after falling down on my head. And waking up from a head injury like mine is like having the world's worst hangover, since your brain is swollen, and thus everything sensory is heightened 1,000,000 times. The tiniest noise is utterly maddening. I'm autistic as it is, so I'm already unable to block out sensory input, but a head injury makes this worse to a degree I cannot possibly express in words. I guess I really was planning to murder the old man in the next bed because he snored when he slept, and given that he was really unwell and fat, he slept a lot. It was like being assaulted by a group of thugs using nothing but audio. More than this, what is horrible is that everyone, and I mean everyone, basically ignores everything you say. Head injury patients are notoriously sensitive in this way, so people who work with them just ignore you, while you suffer horribly. They ignore what you say about it, like the driver of the short bus. I felt like an invisible person suddenly, or a dog whose human companions generally ignore him in favor of screens. It's lonely and mentally taxing and infuriating. Pretty much all of this surprised me. I continued to be surprised by my stay in the rehab hospital where I had my own room, not far from the boy with third-degree burns all over his body from lighting himself on fire with gas, the lady who screamed for Jesus to come save her all day and night, and the nice lady who told me she had every joint in her body surgically replaced with exact replicas. Honestly, the whole thing seems like a script from a bizarre movie where no one gets to be a hero. Everyone suffers in silence, punctuated by random exhortations to a 2,000-year-old man or God, some with determination, some with dignity, some with desperation, and some with decibels. Also, I forgot to mention that I lost my sense of smell in this head injury also, in addition to the tinnitus. Next story. When my mom came out of her coma, car accident trauma plus medical induction, she acted like a child and basically grew up again over the course of the first 2 days. It was freaky. We had to keep reminding her who she was, where she was, and what happened to her. Also, she refused to believe that her legs were broken. She had internal fixtures, not casts, so she kept trying to get out of bed. It took her about 2 weeks to fully be aware and functioning again, but her personality was forever altered by the trauma of her brain. Next story. I'll add mine even though nothing cool happened to me. I was pitching in a baseball game. Their heavy hitter came up, but I knew he couldn't hit my fastball. The first one zinged by him, the second he ripped, and he said he thought he'd killed me. He said I finished my pitch and went into a fielding stance and the ball went off my forehead. I was told I dropped like a burlap bag of warm meat. I was taken to the hospital, and for 131 hours, I was out. I don't remember anything after hearing the crack of that bat. I woke up slowly, but when I was fully awake, I had a slight headache, no brain damage, contrary to what those other mothers say, and some stiff muscles. The guy who hit the bat was grateful that I didn't die, and I was somewhat pleased as well. Next story. I was in a coma for almost 2 weeks after I had several surgeries resulting in my death and my revival. Waking up was interesting. When I woke up, I sat up and started choking. I still had the tube in my throat, so I ripped it out. I had blood running down my chin, and some nurse came in and started shouting and screaming. So that was my welcome back. Apparently, during the time I was out, I was able to respond by drawing. At any rate, during that time, the surgeon that messed up the initial surgery had filed for retirement. My sister was separating from her husband, or they were fighting or something. My little sister had a boyfriend. My brother had gotten an award at his sales job. It had been eventful. In such a short span of time, so many things happened, and yet it seemed like it passed slowly and quickly at the same time. It's a weird feeling. Next story. When I was about 14, I fell off of a car park roof and landed on my head. Had a brain hemorrhage. Woke up in hospital 2 or 3 days later and couldn't speak at all. It was like mumbling noises from a baby. The only thing I could say, which I said a lot, was, "Where are my fish and chips?" Turned out I'd had the accident while my mom had gone out to pick us up some fish and chips for dinner when I had the accident. I didn't know who anyone was, but hadn't forgotten how to play the PlayStation. So one thing that I am remembering now, I believe that talking and singing are in different parts of your brain. I swear I read somewhere about a guy who was in a coma and he couldn't talk or speak properly or whatever, but he could hum and whistle and sing because that's like a different part of the noggin. So maybe communicating through song is the way to go. I should probably also double check this factually before I say anything else, but I know that singing is elsewhere in the brain. I can say that for sure. But the rest, don't hold me to it. Anyway, next story. So, my aunt fell into a coma after giving birth, due to the afterbirth not being removed properly and her getting an infection. I believe she was in a coma for 2 to 3 months. I was only about a year old at the time, so I don't remember. My mom, who she was very close to, ended up getting to visit her regularly and would tell her about her baby, tell her every little detail. She had multiple visitors a day, and the nurse encouraged everyone to talk to her. But when she came out of her coma, she swears the only person she remembers hearing was my mom talking about her baby boy. As for what changed, well, as you can imagine, her baby was newborn when she fell into the coma and was a few months old when she came out. From what my mom said, she had a hard time accepting that, and it took a while for her to, actually realize that yes, this was her baby. And then she had trouble bonding with the baby, but eventually was able to. I'm trying to remember if my mom said anything else about her had changed. I think I remember her saying my aunt had memory issues, but they cleared up relatively quickly. She wasn't able to have any more children as a result of what happened, though, which I guess is a change. Next story. Not precisely a coma, but decades ago, my mother had a sudden cardiac arrest out on a work site that we were on, was defibrillated at least once after bystander CPR, and came back but did not wake up. Her brain was deprived of oxygen for at least a minute, and we didn't know how soon she would wake up. The next morning, she came to briefly and recognized us, but was very tired, and the medical team put her under for another few hours. Looking back, I don't think they actually knew how much damage the brain may have suffered, but did not tell us any of that. She awoke day 2 and stayed awake, but she had some minor damage which affected short-term memory. On that day, it was literally 10 to 30 seconds. She would not recognize us some of the time, but kept looping her thoughts as her memory rest. Over the next 2 weeks, she stayed in hospital awaiting a defib to be implanted, and her brain continued to recover. Her memory would last minutes to an hour or two at a time. We were warned as her brain was healing, her thoughts might be jumbled, and it is typical for people to flip their emotions, and she may say horrible things to people she loves. Sure enough, on day 10, she was telling Dad she wanted a divorce, and that she always hated my sister and I, complete polar opposite of my normally loving, thoughtful mom. She tried to escape from the hospital twice, confused why she was there when she didn't think she needed to be, and once turned away from a nurse and faced the wall away from her, convinced that a nurse was a B-word who was trying to kill her. By week 3, her memory was quickly returning to normal, and there were no more memory loops. She just couldn't remember the day of the incident and the day before. Now she has the same occasional things like forgetting words, but no other cognitive issues, and just has ongoing cardiomyopathy and fatigue. And now she can't remember being in the hospital at all, and we make jokes about counting her age from that year on now. Next story. My mother, she was in a medically induced coma for 5 months. When she was finally stable, they woke her up and she had lost a lot of her memory. I am the youngest of 3. I myself am 23, my brother is 41, and my sister is 39. She could not remember me, but she did remember my brother, my sister, and my dad. I have a different dad than my brother and sister. And she actually thought I was a long-lost son of my dad's because I look so much like him. When we tried to explain to her that I'm her son, she was completely confused and actually panicked a little. But then when I went home after being awake for nearly 50 hours, I got a call from the hospital just as I was about to go to bed. It was my mom. She remembered me and was crying hysterically that she had forgotten about me. So I went back to the hospital and she hugged me and told me how sorry she was. I told her that it wasn't her fault and we both cried our eyes out. She's doing very well now and we're closer than ever. Next story. I spent roughly 60 hours in a coma one time. The doctors, they believe it was caused by some medication, but I'm convinced my brain just shut down because I was in so much pain. I never had a reaction to that medication otherwise, so their theory doesn't make sense to me. Anyway, the only thing really surprising to me was that I was in a coma at all. I have clear memories, even 20 plus years later, of events that happened in the room while I was supposedly out. I can't remember exactly how I felt when I woke up, but I really thought only the day had passed. Since I went into the coma at like 4 a.m. and came out at like 4 p.m., I just thought that was the same day. When they told me it was 2 days later, I argued. I told them the things I remembered. They did confirm these things happened though, so was I really in a coma? Able to see and hear? Or were my doctors morons? I guess I'll never really know, but I do lean towards morons, simply because they then performed an unnecessary surgery which was supposed to fix the problem, and, well, the problem still persists 20 plus years later. Next story. My grandmother passed away 3 times, but was revived and spent about a month in a coma. When she woke up, it was like her brain had literally done a hard reset on itself. She had no motor skills, memories, or pretty much anything outside of her autonomous bodily functions. It took about a year to re-raise her, and I specifically remember about 3 months after waking up, I called the landline at her home trying to get in touch with my grandfather. She picked up, and when I asked her if I could speak to him, she responded, "Yeah," and a minute goes by before I say anything else. She could acknowledge that I was speaking to her and give vague responses, but she didn't get up and take the phone to him. After that year, though, she was back for the most part. For some reason, she was a little less compassionate and sympathetic to family, whereas beforehand, she was the kindest, most genuinely nice and caring soul I had ever had the great fortune of knowing. She was still a loving person, but it's like her patience had forgotten to reactivate itself. I don't know, man, it was weird. Not long after that, she passed away from cancer, but not without a fight. While in hospice, the nurse told us it seemed as though she kept fighting because the family and friends around kept cheering her on and telling her that she would beat it. We all agreed that we didn't want to make her suffer more than she had to, and individually sat with her and made our peace with her, letting her know it was okay to let go and stop fighting it if it were easier for her. Her daughters, my mother and aunt, went last, and not 5 minutes after they both said goodbye, she was gone. It was hands down the most surreal day of my life. I know I kind of went off topic, but sorry about that. Next story. So, I was in a coma for 7 weeks, and when I woke up, the first thing I remember is the gagging feeling of them taking out my ventilation. I had no idea how much time had passed and cried when I found out. I remember staying awake for 48 hours after waking up because I had extreme fear of sleeping and could not remember how to breathe. I would panic regularly. I had also injured my leg prior to being in a coma, and for me, having to entirely relearn how to walk was the biggest surprise. Additionally, given the length of time I was in a coma, I woke up to a layer of fine baby hair all over my body because I had lost so much weight despite the feeding tube. Next story. Not me, my mom. My parents and I were in a pretty bad car accident when I was a baby. She was in a coma for 2 weeks, in a separate hospital from my dad, and I was at a children's hospital. When my mom woke up, her only concern was me. She remembered the accident very clearly, including what she was wearing, what lane we were in, that the car was coming at us, that it was blue, and she kept asking about me. But she didn't ever ask how my dad was doing. She remembered the accident, but she didn't remember that my dad was also in the car or that she even had a husband. She got really confused when the doctors tried to update her on his condition, and then when he called her, my dad had a knee replacement, so he wasn't in a coma, but he couldn't visit her for a while. She eventually did remember after several days, and the doctors, they explained it as mother's instinct, that her brain was so concerned for her child that she couldn't think about anyone else. She doesn't remember now that she didn't remember him. And we're all fine now, that was almost 30 years ago. So yeah, don't drink and drive. Next story. My grandpa had a stroke at the age of 86 or 87 a few years ago. He's 89 in February. When he woke up, I don't remember when or how long he was in a coma, he started speaking the Sicilian dialect. He learned it when he was a kid before moving to the middle of Italy. After about 5 minutes, he started speaking Italian again, but would say completely random things like, "I don't like these people," even when my grandma was the only other person in the house, or "I will they say for the money." Or maybe he'd even say completely invented words. Sometimes he'd even speak in other languages like English. He also became unable to live on his own, and it would be quicker at explaining what he could do. He can walk, kind of. He can slowly eat. He can talk, and I think that's it. My grandma has to follow him around all day, and me and my mom and my aunt have been helping her since day one for this thing. Sometimes he cries when I see him. I think because for a moment he becomes self-aware of his disease and is sad about the fact that he will never see me graduate or get a degree. He was a family man and loved everyone, but specifically was fond of me. He also loved computers like me and would have spent hours talking about them, or more generally, just about electronics. As for my grandma, she drastically changed too. She got very depressed because she, like him, is trapped in her house. And he's trapped in his brain. Kinda reminds me about the movie Johnny Got His Gun. But she can't do anything apart from watching TV, reading the paper, and cook food. So I go to visit her every day after school since her house is really close to the school. Closer than my house to make her a bit happier. I think she's just mentally degrading, just like her husband with all these years just staying in the house. Next story. I had a patient who was giving birth and had a rare complication, amniotic fluid embolism. Basically, the amniotic fluid gets into the mother's circulation and wreaks havoc. They did a perimortem cesarean to get the baby out, and after 40 minutes downtime, they managed to get the mother back, and both were flown to our hospital. The first night, the mother was dying from bad multi-organ failure, but the baby seemed to have survived. She spent the second day going down the gurgler to the point that we had prepared the husband for her death. The second night, the baby suddenly died, and she started to improve. Her husband believed strongly that the baby gave his life so mom could have a chance, he said. On the fourth day, she was off all life support systems but could not remember a thing. Her husband, or the fact that she was pregnant. The husband was absolutely distraught because she would scream when he came nearby because she didn't know who he was. A few days later, when she went to the ward, it was still the same. He was crying because he thought he had lost her, yet he didn't. but he sort of had lost her person rather than her physical self. And I hope she recovered her memory and life like so many people on this thread. It was so dramatic, and I'm sure I won't ever forget her. Next story. Back in the early 2000s, I woke up from a 2-day coma with a tube stuck down my throat to find out I was in a really bad car accident where the driver, my childhood friend, passed away during the accident. I remember most of the day, but don't remember stepping into his car and anything after that. Paramedic that visited me in the hospital said if he hadn't gotten there any sooner, I wouldn't have made it. Was on heavy medication for 1 week and everything seemed like a blur. Strangely enough, there was a passenger in the backseat with no seatbelt on and all he had was a few bruises and a sprained ankle. Next story. I was in a coma for 3 days while 8.5 months pregnant. I remember nothing. When I woke up, it was like nothing had happened, except for catching up on the news. I heard nothing, recall nothing. All I know is that people around me were terrified. I almost wish I'd felt or heard something more because looking back, the nothingness is frightening. Then my brain, my outlook, my memories, nothing changed. And while I was still in the hospital, post-coma obviously, my baby decided to be born. He was 5 weeks early and none of the nurses believed I was actually giving birth. They all just thought I was still just some woozy lady just out of a coma. Nope. After 3 kids, I knew what giving birth felt like. He was born 6 minutes after my water broke. Life is normal now, but I do sometimes still think it's weird that I was in a short coma just a couple of years ago. Next story. 3 years ago, I was assaulted at my apartment by men with a baseball bat, and I suffered a severe traumatic brain injury, amongst other injuries. I was in a coma on life support for 28 days. When I finally regained consciousness, I was completely blind. I had no idea where I was or what was going on. I was not able to speak due to the tracheectomy, and I was restrained, so completely blind, mute, strapped to a bed, no idea where I was or what happened, and also the skull had been removed from the top right part of my head, which was one of the strangest feelings I've ever experienced. Additionally, during the coma, I had the most vivid dreams and hallucinations I've ever experienced in my life, complete with names, dates, locations, events, and dialogue. When I was finally able to speak about a week later, I was asking about these events because I believed them to be real since I knew so much about them. My family was kind enough to entertain my questions and would look up events that happened on those dates, but none of them were real, and I couldn't comprehend that. I told them I was there, I saw it happen, and there was no way it didn't happen. At that point, I did not have much higher level brain function, so I understand now that it was not real, but for a long time, I would have flashbacks to the hallucinations, and it would give me terrible PTSD. That took a long time and a lot of therapy to get over. Also, it was more than a year of vision, speech, physical, and occupational therapy before I was able to function again. But now, my life is great. I was able to get my license back, go back to college, and I just got engaged. So this story, OP mentioning that they had PTSD and flashbacks to things that didn't happen, it reminds me just a little bit of the story of the lamp. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? I'm not going to explain it, and it's kind of sad and depressing, but the story of the lamp, it's a thing on Reddit. The lamp, it is, look it up if you want to. Maybe there's a video or you can find the original comment, but oh, that's a story. Anyway, next story. So, my dad had heart valve surgery in a VA hospital in 2003. He developed an infection in the incision and they had to put him in a medically induced coma because he was really uncooperative and was going to unalive himself. They did it at the request of me and my aunt. He was high on painkillers and couldn't make decisions for himself. And when they brought him out of it, he kicked the Indian nurses out. This is important to the story. Once they left, he asked us where they had found him. Turns out he thought there had been a massive terrorist attack. The US was occupied by terrorist forces, that he had been caught up in said attack and was being held as a POW in the hospital, and that my aunt and I were visiting him due to the US government pulling some strings. He thought the nurses were his captors. He had no memory of his surgery or the past few months before the surgery, and it all came back pretty quickly, but I still laugh about it 16 years later. Next story. In an induced coma for 2 weeks due to a surgery gone wrong, resulting in sepsis, had a hard time realizing those dreams for the past few weeks weren't real. Those dreams were scary, being sodomized by extended family member, watching my brother die, having someone's head sawed off. Saw a face but didn't recognize it. Some weren't, going back and forth on a train to my grandparents' house and back, seeing the kids and wife, various activities with family members. I had good dreams of those who talked to me in the coma, but bad dreams of those who didn't. Just love her or him because it probably was not a good experience. And you're coming off so many drugs that it takes a week to realize what is going on. Next story. My taste for sweets tasted of some sort of bitter salt. So anytime I was given something sweet, it would flood my mouth with that flavor. and whatever I was able to keep down came right back up. It wasn't a permanent change, but definitely a very unfortunate side effect of an overdosed and sun-cooked brain. I also had some hair loss in certain areas that wouldn't grow for months. When it came back, it was just black. My hair is normally brown. Even over the last 6 years, the color adjusted back to brown again. I don't know if any of that is common to overdoses/heat stroke patients because as far as my knowledge goes, not many actually make it through that combination of accidents. For those that are concerned, by the way, I didn't stop using unfortunately until just about 2 years and 2 months ago. My memory is very frustrating now that my brain has taken such heavy blows over the years. That hasn't stopped me though. I'm an honor student now and I just started my own company designing and fabricating jewelry, metalworks, furniture, and well, anything I can fabricate. I hope this helps someone. Next story. So this is long. Now, not me, but a friend of mine was in a coma for approximately 3 months. He wasn't expected to live. To set the stage, this was 1990. We were a group of 18-year-olds who went to high school together, worked at a pizza restaurant together evenings and weekends, and partied together when we had any time off. Basically, we spent almost every waking moment together. We were in our prime, paid homage to the teenage trends of the era and tried to dress to impress. The guys were into athletic basketball wear and the girls whatever. 3 of the guys were best friends and had names that all started with the same letter, say Adam, Aiden, Alan. We called them the 3 A's. Sure, insert pun here if you want. So the 3 A's all bought matching purple suede Air Jordan high-top runners and wore them everywhere. One Friday night, pretty much all of us were working, but we were in a great mood, looking forward to closing time and a big party we had planned for after work. It was a very busy shift and 3 pair of purple shoes got a great workout. Alan, he got off work first and raced back home on his bike to shower, get changed, and get ready for the party after work. He was going to meet back up with us at the restaurant when we all got off. He never made it, and the party never happened. He was hit by a car on his bike while crossing a busy intersection and suffered a severe head injury. These were the days before bike helmets were the norm, so he lost one of his purple shoes. The rest is a bit of a blur. We learned of the accident, closed the restaurant early, raced downtown to the hospital, waited, and waited, little updates here and there. Alan's in surgery, Alan's out of surgery, Alan's in critical condition, nobody can see him except immediate family. They have inserted a pressure monitor into Alan's brain and the numbers don't look good. Crying, hugging, praying, all in a smoke-filled 1990s waiting room haze. Alan did eventually wake up after like 3 months. The IVs, catheters, and tracheectomy were removed. He had to learn how to walk again. Eventually, he was transferred to a rehab unit 6 months after the accident, and we finally got to visit him. His hair was growing out from being shaved, and he had a very large scar. He would say a few words, but also had an erase board to communicate in writing. When we asked if he remembered who we were, he wrote down some of our names on the whiteboard. We'd made some small talk about this and that, and when he couldn't find the words, he would write them on the board. After about 20 minutes, he looked at the floor and noticed the other 2 A's wearing their purple shoes and started really laughing, which made us laugh too. Then he started laughing to the point where tears were streaming down his cheeks and he could barely stop. We asked him if he remembered his shoes, and he shook his head no. And then we asked him if he liked the shoes, thinking we might need to get him a replacement pair. And he laughed even harder and harder again and shook his head and whispered no, and he said they were ugly. Next story. Veterinarian I know had a motorcycle wreck, ended up in a coma because the docs wouldn't amputate legs sooner and went septic. He also lost oxygen for about 8 minutes and was in a coma for about 7 days. None of the scans showed any brain activity, and they were telling the family to pull the plug. Before the coma, but after the wreck, he was coherent and normal. After the coma, he could not recall information reliably. If he had met you before 5 years prior, he remembered you, but within that 5 years, it was iffy if he would remember you. His memories were incorrect. I worked with his son, and it was one of the hardest things watching him go through that. It was hard on all of us watching our boss go from one of the smartest men we knew to not being able to recall anything accurately. He still has memory problems, but otherwise is making progress towards healing. He was in the hospital for 8 months with surgery and rehab issues. Next story. Was in a coma for 7 days. Though I had varying states of consciousness throughout those days, it was not a medically induced coma. But after I regained consciousness, I couldn't walk or move the left side of my body at all. The weird part about it was that I could remember walking and moving, I just couldn't make my body behave like I wanted to. The strangest thing about looking back on this time, however, is the complete lack of terror I had, or indeed any emotion whatsoever. After waking up completely incapacitated, even though my life had changed entirely, my personality was very different too, I was not in a state of mind to contemplate what this could mean or how I even felt about it. Over the following months, I learned how to walk again and gained most of my movements back on my left side, though I do struggle with fine motor movements and my balance, especially in the dark. Next story. I heard everything. during my coma. I was aware, but not, if that makes sense. And it was awful hearing how abusive family members felt about me, unencumbered by thinking I couldn't hear them. Some medical staff were also awful, but only those who believed whatever those family members told them. I was 17 at the time, though. I always forget how long I was out because it didn't feel real, and I felt suspended outside of Earth's gravity, but tethered to/locked in my own body. But I now know that it was a few weeks. I ended up coding during it. I, in my awareness, left my body completely and was asked by some grateful non-physical beings if I wanted to go back into my body and try again in this life or just start over. In another body, life, timeline, universe, wasn't fully aware but wasn't fully ignorant of what they meant either. I said in the space of only what I could describe as a vacuum suspended outside of this Earth and its gravitational field, "I've got this. Put me back." We weren't talking English, so I have no idea how we were communicating. Right as I said that, though, my awareness clipped through multiple perceptions of reality or gravity, not really sure, and my awareness shot straight back into my body. I jolted up in the hospital bed, taking an impossibly huge breath because my body was screaming at me for oxygen. I don't think I've ever taken a breath that big ever since. Everyone in the room just stood there in disbelief, watching me trying to take in as much air as I could after the code. They stood there, the medical staff, family, just stricken, dumbfounded, incredulous that my body didn't give out and that I didn't die. Once I caught my breath and my vitals stabilized, I looked right over at my abusive family members in the room and told them with the most power I could gather, "Get out." I was shaking from rage and almost dying, but I made it through. And the first thing I did was to do the best thing I could do and change my life for the better. I went no contact with them for 5 years after that. I lost a lot of muscle and have lasting memory issues, but the restored feeling of purpose I got from choosing to come back, it's changed my life. Sorry for rambling, but I haven't ever really shared what happened. Next story. Not me, but a friend. He was in a medically induced coma for about 10 days after suffering an aneurysm and then having another while in a coma. I sent him a message after he had woken up and he responded by telling me he'd seen a guy neither of us liked when we'd been in the Navy together almost 20 years ago. I knew he had been out for upwards of 10 years, but I thought maybe it was possible. Then he told me he was still in and had done 22 years so far. I was confused and doubted my own memory for a moment. A day or so later, his girlfriend contacts me. She tells me that his memory is all messed up and he thinks he and she were in the Navy together. He's still in and other things. She's confirmed he's definitely been out for 12 years. She asked me to talk to him and to help him try to regain his memories. It's really scary how fragile memory is. Next story. When I was 12 years old, I was in the woods playing manhunt at nighttime with some friends. My team found an amazing spot in a tree. The tree wasn't that high up, so you could easily climb it. Someone on the other team, though, came up behind me and I got surprised and slipped, and then darkness. It only felt like 5 seconds, but I woke up and it was like 2 feet larger and had lots of hair. It didn't even seem that long, but I asked a nurse, and she said it's been 7 years. I was so scared that I ripped the IV off and tried to stand up, but I couldn't. My legs didn't work and I fell. The nurse called for backup and they told me to stay. About 1 hour later, my parents came in the room crying. I was wondering how it happened and they said I almost died. Everything looked so new, but I could never forget my parents' faces before and after I fell. They looked old, and I started to cry because I missed so much of my life. Next story. The biggest change that surprised me after waking up was learning that I was engaged to be married. While I was in a coma, my fiancé sat beside me and ended up meeting everyone in my family, whom at the time hadn't yet heard of our engagement. As she spent time with them, they really grew to love her and developed a newfound appreciation for what makes a family a family. Over the years, my family had grown apart, and my hospitalization, coupled with how everyone took to my fiancé, started bringing everyone back together. Anyway, when I woke up, I had no memory of her. I didn't recognize her, nor did I recall any of the events she claimed to have happened. Everyone, myself included, came to the acceptance that I had amnesia. But then you start to wonder, if you were engaged to someone but don't remember them, are you really engaged? The days would pass and my fiancé and I were spending more and more time together. She wasn't hard on the eyes at all, and we got along well enough, so I thought, I'm into her, she's into me, and my family approves. Maybe the memories we created will come back with time. There are worse fates in life, and after speaking with some of the family members, I decided to re-propose to her, and we were re-engaged to be married. Fast forward to the day of the wedding, the priest is beginning the ceremony and my fiancé stops everything and confesses that she's been lying this whole time, that we were never engaged. We didn't know each other at all, that it all started as a simple misunderstanding, but now she's in love with my brother. Yup, her and I had never met, and she had seen me numerous times while at work and fancied me from afar. Apparently, I was being mugged in the train station where she worked, and the muggers knocked me down onto the train tracks, where I hit my head, which led to my coma. She witnessed the assault and accompanied me to the hospital where a nurse misunderstood her and put her down as my fiancé. At that point, things progressed quickly, meeting my family, feeling embarrassed, trying to figure out what to do, etc., and she just stuck with the ruse. Anyway, to add insult to injury, while I was sleeping, she had been spending time with my brother, who had rushed to visit me in the hospital. She slowly began to fall in love with him. Can't get worse, right? Oh, well, it can. My real ex-fiancé storms in and demands the wedding be stopped. Chaos ensues, everyone's bickering, my fake fiancé leaves me at the altar and sneaks out the door amongst the rabble. So, what did my brother do? He goes to work and proposes to her, with our entire family watching. Yep, you can't make this crap up. Is this a movie? Or a TV show? I've noticed a few times now somebody will tell a story and it feels a little too fantastical or worded in a peculiar way, and it's a movie or a TV show. And I've caught it a few times. Even if I don't know what it's from, I've caught it a few times. And this is worded like one of those rare stories. Is this from a movie? OP, what is this from? I would have almost maybe believed it if the real ex-fiancé didn't storm in and demand the wedding be stopped at the dramatic last moment. What is this? Anyway, next story. So, finally an answer that I can provide without making it a meme. I've been in a coma for 2 weeks as far as I know, and a few things effed up in 2 weeks. One is that I was and still am always trembling like no crap whenever I'm deep in my imagination when listening to a song. I can't stop cutting my tongue using my teeth, which caused my jaw a lot of issues. My memory effed up and I couldn't remember anything from what happened before those 2 weeks, and I'm still struggling to remember and focus over basic things. I'm not sure if those new changes in my body happened because I was in a coma as a child, around 5, or because of something else that is yet to be discovered. But it definitely surprised me and still surprises me to this day when I was told this story during one of my conversations with my mother. Next story. Probably too late for this to get noticed, but here goes. A friend of mine was on some heavy drugs before I knew her, like serious stuff. Her dad had been an addict since he was 11. She was the type of kid that with just one look you knew she didn't have a chance. Anyway, one time she OD'd. Really bad. She was put into a coma for a few days. When she woke up, she was similar to a child. It was like her brain was rebooting. She's absolutely fine now and in college, but when I first met her, she was incredibly slow to talk to or respond, mainly just smiled blankly. Next story. I was in a chemically induced coma for 7 days following a dirt bike crash. I woke up with my jaw wired shut, an arm in a sling, neck braced, and a cast in my wrist, with no clue how I got there or what happened. It was surreal and a lot to digest in 3 minutes. I didn't remember anything from about 8 hours prior, and still don't. I will have dreams about it, and remembering in my dreams the helicopter rotor wash blowing sand all over my face, and the pain when they put the neck brace on with my badly broken jaw. I also sustained a TBI called a subdural hematoma on my left frontal lobe. I was unable to walk at first and spent some time in an inpatient physical rehab facility. That was tough. What was tougher was not knowing if my brain would ever connect the dots again and make everything work like it should in terms of balance and motor skills. I lost a lot of weight from the broken jaw too, but I probably needed to anyhow. But a lot of people suffer cognitive disabilities after such trauma. Not for me. In fact, the only lasting things that I can notice are a bunch of things from high school that I did not remember/know before, that I certainly do now. For instance, all the grammar Nazi things, like there, and there, or your, etc., and all the differences between those. There's just a lot of things that came back immediately following my accident, and I suppose I'm a better person because of it all. Next story. In my early 20s, a drunk driver put me into a month-long coma, flatlined 5 times. When I woke up, I was struck by how much I felt I had missed out on being gone that month. Everyone else's life just kept going, and only my story stopped. It wasn't dark, not heaven or hell or anything, it was just non-existence. It was the absence of life. And also, holy crap, it was freaking bright when I woke up. It was like going into a movie during the day and coming out with the sun at high noon, but the intensity of the brightness was like looking directly into a searchlight or a 20,000 candle hunting torch. It was nuts. My mind reset too. I've been different ever since. My humor is different. I appreciate things a lot more now. Before the coma, my favorite color was dark blue. Now, if you can believe it or not, I can hardly freaking believe it, it's orange. Yeah, blood red orange. I'm grateful though. I've got a million broken bones and a lot of titanium in me, but if all that didn't happen, I wouldn't have taken the chances that I have and started a veteran charity. I'm lucky. It gave me insight into what it feels like to be dead. There's no sadness, no contemplation. It's the epitome of nothingness. You only live on in the hearts of the people who loved you. Now, even when life is crappy, it's sure better than the alternative. I'm gonna die again one day, this time for real. So I live every day now like it could be my last, because one day it will be. Next story. Leading up to his liver transplant, my dad was placed in a coma more than once. Several times I thought he was going to die and not come back. Anywho, from his perspective, he came out of the coma while intubated with a breathing tube in his mouth like at the start of The Matrix. My cousins happened to be the ones standing over his bed, and while he couldn't talk, they pulled out an iPhone and tried to let him write what he needed on them, to low success. From his perspective, though, he's mentioned he was disoriented and confused, thinking he must be dreaming or in heaven or something. I think this stems from the fact that my two cousins wouldn't be amongst the first people he'd anticipate standing over his hospital bed, me and my sister and mom being first, my own grandmother and then his sisters next. The worst part I've heard from him, and which makes sense, was not being allowed to breathe on his own or really communicate at all with that hose stuck down his throat. In the slow pace of the hospital and getting things done, he was kind of trapped in and unable to speak to reassure us or really have a conversation about what happened until they removed the tube. Plus, it's super uncomfortable and irritating on the vocal cords. First time this sucked and was terrifying. Second and third times, we just effing hated how slow the hospital moved to get the tube out. We thought if he was awake and aware, he should just be allowed to effing breathe and talk. Next story. After I had my hernia surgery when I was like 5-ish, I woke up at the hospital. I was a kid. I was scared of the dark at the time, so when I woke up, I wanted the light on. I proceeded to attempt to get out of the hospital bed, and I fell and landed on my face and broke my nose and fractured my skull. I was induced in a coma for 37 days due to brain swelling. I woke up and was speaking with a Russian-German accent. I still have it today to an extent. People I work with ask me where I'm from, and I said, well, I was raised in Illinois but born in Indiana. Lived there for 3 years, then we moved to Illinois. They say I have a weird accent. Next story. I haven't been in a coma, but after having heart surgery and a month later having emergency lung surgery, I have a far too real understanding of the mental confusion that I've read here. There are times that I will get a flood of snippets of memories and I can't tell what's real and what isn't, as if trying to remember pieces of a whole bunch of dreams all hitting C once, and yet fading away almost as soon as they hit me. It's just wave after wave. They are greatly decreasing since and getting farther and farther apart, and I've always been able to maintain control by understanding what was happening, but I have an inkling of what it must be to be insane. It's kind of scary at times. Next story. A friend of mine in his early 20s was out riding his motorcycle and got hit by a drunk driver who ran a red light. He was in a coma for 6 months. When he woke up, he couldn't remember the last 4 to 5 years. He didn't remember me and most of his friends. He didn't remember being in the army. And the most heartbreaking thing was that he didn't remember his super sweet, drop-dead gorgeous fiancée. She hoped that he would remember or fall in love with her again, but he did not. She had to cancel all of their wedding plans and walk away from the relationship. I kept in touch with his family, and he had to do physical and speech therapy for about a year. He and his physical therapist, they fell in love and got married a few years later. Next story. I was in a coma for just short of 24 hours due to a self-unaliving attempt roughly 7 years ago. When I made that attempt, I felt so useless. All my life, my mother had me believing that money was more important than my well-being. I was living with my sister and her husband at the time, I'll just say my brother to keep it shorter, and I felt like a good-for-nothing strain on them. No one would hire me, and my high school grades were too crappy to be accepted into any programs I was interested in. Life always felt a little harder for me, and I couldn't figure out why. Later found out I have a chronic illness. Anyway, if my brother didn't come home from work that day, my attempt would have succeeded. When I woke up, my bed was surrounded by my family, some I hadn't contacted for years, and others who lived hours out of town. And that's when something clicked. I am loved, and I am worth it. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been there. When I was in the hospital, they hooked me up with all the resources I needed to succeed. I haven't been unemployed since, and I've never felt the need to make another self-unaliving attempt. I still have chronic illness that prevents me from doing many, many things, but my community is my power, and with them, I can face anything. Next story. Oh, it's too bad I'm so late to this question because of all the threads I've ever replied to. This is my thread. At 23, I went under anesthesia for a 15-minute lip cyst removal surgery. Yes, you heard that right. Don't ask why I needed a surgery for that. It was my former doctor's call. And, well, I woke up 10 days later with one leg sawed off. Obviously, it's a super long story, but I had a weak heart, and despite going through multiple surgeries before without a hitch, this one went south. The stress of the anesthesia caused my heart to fail, called Takotsubo's disease, and the stress of my heart failure led to organ failure and almost death. Obviously, my body went into shock, which pulls your blood to your core in an attempt to save your internal organs. The lack of circulation caused my right leg to die, and I was in such a delicate state that they had to wait for me to stabilize enough to go into another surgery. I was in an induced coma this entire time, and while they waited, my leg continued to die further and further up. So when I finally stabilized again, still in a coma, they amputated above the knee. Woke up to the feeling of having my respiratory tube removed. Biggest feeling was of confusion. My right leg was swollen to the size of a Christmas ham and bandages up. Took a while for me to grasp that it had been amputated despite nurses and my mother telling me multiple times. I told my whole story, including the reason my heart failed and how my recovery went on This Is Actually Happening podcast, Season 9, Episode 1 for those who would like a detailed rundown of the whole journey. But my takeaway? Don't mess with anesthesia. It's not something to ever take lightly. Do all the fun things you can because you may lose the ability one day when you least expect it. And take videos of you doing those things to remember them by. Was hospitalized for a month, car wreck, junior year of high school. I was in a coma for 5 days. When I awoke was uncouth. Several people from school occasionally visited. Friends, family were treated warmly by me. But folks that came in groups from school with individuals who were the people who were not so welcoming to me before the wreck, you know what I mean, were run off by my resentment of them in my presence. Vulgar language, throwing things off nightstands, and even spat at a few. I didn't hide or deflect my true feelings whatsoever. Kinda Trump-like. I said whatever I was thinking, no matter who it was, regardless of others' feelings or consequences. Nurses would come and say visiting hours were over. The neurosurgeon treating me told my father at the time I would never pass a military entrance physical after my accident. That was me for 2 weeks after I awoke from the coma. About the beginning of the 4th week, I awoke that morning and my high school sweetheart was only one there. She came daily. Anyway, when I opened my eyes, I saw her at the foot of my bed and said, "Where am I?" "You're in the hospital," she said. "You've been here for 3 weeks." And I said, "Nah." I said and only realized she was speaking the truth after I got out of bed and looked out the 6th floor window. Week later, after several tests, I was released. My grades then improved in high school, and 13 months later, my ASVAB, I think they're called that, test scores were all in the mid to high 90s, and I passed my physical. Coma disqualified me/you from military piloting and nuclear weapons career fields. I served honorably, though, for 4 years active and 3 years active reserve. I was even an augmentee to special operations for several months. I truly feel and will always believe somebody up there likes me. Quoting General Robert L. Scott here when I say, God is my co-pilot. Amen. Next story. I was in a medically induced coma for about a week following a left frontal lobe contusion, TBI. I remember my parents being there, so I knew it was serious, but I tried to downplay how hard it would be to recover. I remember bits and pieces of waking up. I remember thinking about a girl I was interested in at school who I was supposed to share answers with the day before I fell down the stairs. She called me in the hospital and I thought I had a chance, but when I got back to school, she rejected me. Feels bad, man. And it's hard to explain a brain injury. Imagine having headaches every day that meds don't really solve, but temporarily reduce the symptoms enough to get work done. I was lucky to return to a mostly normal college life, but it's not the same as before. I feel a lot more paranoid. Sometimes I hear voices, but the docs say it's not a psychological disorder like schizophrenia, it's just a result of the injury. I can't smoke weed at all anymore. Coming back to school was crappy, and being here is crappy. I'm excited to get my degree and never look back. Being in a coma, it's not fun. And even when I woke up, there's a lot of stuff my parents told me I said, but I don't remember saying. Turns out I'm mad my grandpa hit me when I was a kid. I didn't get any accent or new language, just chronic headaches and a low frustration tolerance. Next story. I spent 3 weeks in a coma following OHS February 15th, 2018. When I woke up, they kept me sedated for an additional 2 or 3 days until they could finish stabilizing me. Long story, and I will try to make it short. I had coronary artery bypass grafts, CBAG ×5, and I am a blood clot patient as well. I coded during surgery and coded twice in ICU. I developed pneumonia and for about 5 days was only given a 10% chance of surviving to the next morning. I remember hearing myself breathing through the breathing tube they had in my throat. They called in my kids from around the country to come say their goodbyes. I remember hearing my kids crying. I remember thinking I was in a COD type of video game. And I also thought I had been abducted and taken out west and was made to oversee the sewage treatment area for an isolated Walmart. I remember my nurse telling me she's going to remove my breathing tube. I mustered up a 2 thumbs up so she knew I heard her. And I remember chanting to myself. When she got it out, she asked what I was saying, and I told her, "Don't fight it. Don't fight it." She wanted to know what, and I said my big brother told me that when it was time to remove the breathing tube. When I finally wasn't so sedated, I was moved to another room in the cardiac wing. I had no motor skills in my hands and arms. I couldn't walk. I had to be taught how to walk and use my arms. I asked my nurse 3 questions. Where am I? What happened? Why did it happen? My daughter gave birth to my first grandchild. My daughter and son-in-law brought my grandson up to where I was to see me. And I don't remember meeting him until sometime in March. It was a hell of a year in 2018. Next story. I was in a coma, unconscious as I was told I could move my arms, for a week after a car crash. I had damaged the left part of my brain, traumatic head injury, and I had broken some bones under my left eye, and I had to relearn how to walk properly, which was strange. But I was so convinced that I was dreaming when I woke up. How the F could I be in a hospital when I went to bed yesterday? Because the last thing I remembered was that. It took 3 to 4 days and visits from my friends to actually convince me that this is reality. Absolute mind F. Next story. I was in a short 3-day coma after an accident when I was 11. Bike versus car. I remember being surprised because my body was too big. I had also already begun puberty, which stopped for 3 years after the accident before growth began to catch up again. I had lost 2.5 years or so of my memory. It was all so confusing because as a foster adopted kid, I had no one to talk to about it with. But I kind of mentally worked things out with myself by making pacts to check in with myself every 6 months or so and see if things made any more sense. 2 or so years later, most of the pieces suddenly fell together and I could remember almost everything from those missing years. Next story. I was in a coma for 10 days because of a combination of stage 2 sepsis and diabetic ketoacidosis. A review panel of 6 doctors evaluated me, and 4 came to the conclusion I was a lost cause. 1 said I would survive but be rendered severely disabled, including profound loss of cognitive function. And 1 doctor thought I would make it, and arranged for intensive therapy after recovery. I learned this from reading my medical record, and clearly that last doctor was right because I'm writing this post. I woke up and opened my eyes, and I could hear I was in the ICU. That said, I was paralyzed. I couldn't move any part of my body except to blink, look around, and open my mouth. I couldn't speak. I couldn't turn my head. I was cognitively in a fog. So these things did not worry me, and I went back to sleep. This state lasted 2 more days. On the 4th day, I woke up and I could turn my head, speak, sing, whistle, and very clumsily move my arms. They did not splint me in the ICU, so my hands were curled up claws. I had many IV bags, but my vision was blurry and I couldn't see what they were. Most importantly to me, I seemed to have a clear mind. My legs were still motionless, but I could still feel and touch with them. My doctor asked me if I had any difficulty with numbness or paralysis before, and I said no, and I asked why he was asking. I was informed that I had a cervical stenosis that would require surgery. I was also told that I had advanced degenerative arthritis of the right hip and that I would need to have that replaced, but it could not be done until my staph infection was clear. I was bedridden for months. I had previously been 210 pounds at 6'1" height. The combination of the gastric effects of the antibiotics I was on with the muscle wasting from inactivity reduced me to 140 pounds. My therapy was extensive and painful, but I did my best. I relearned how to feed myself, how to write and sign my name, and after some months, how to stand, even with my shell of a body and my dislocated hip. I was administered high doses of oxycodone, Dilaudid, and fentanyl for pain, and as my nerves woke up on fire, massive doses of gabapentin. I got my C3 through C6 vertebrae fused with 2 rods and 8 screws. In time, I had my hip replaced. Today, I can go to the loo, shower, eat, brush my teeth, clothe myself, and walk, even though I'm a bit grumpy and it aches. I have no stamina, though, and I am now considered disabled. I'm 50 years old. It's been 19 months now, and doctors are amazed at my recovery and my attitude through all of it. Doctors, nurses, and therapists have all told me I was strong, and that was something that I never knew about myself. That was a superb final story. I liked OP realizing that he was strong there at the end. That touched my heart a bit. And I also have to say that you guys can't see it, but I was struggling this video to read some of these stories and sentences. I don't mean this in a rude way, but I thought maybe brain damage was a thing, but some people wrote weird. And then also today, I sucked as a voice actor, so it was just like a bit of column A, a bit of column B. Editor, I am so sorry. I stumbled over so many sentences. But you know what, guys? One thing we learned throughout the course of this video, memory is incredibly fragile. And these stories are kind of horrifying, to lose memories of your life, to come out a completely different person or a worse person because, you hit your head at times because of someone else's insolence, because of someone else's drunk driving, and for them to take away memories from you and your personality, your being, and that affecting your loved ones is kind of horrifying. But you know what, fellow viewers? If that ever happens to me, if I ever hit my head, I make a promise to you. I will find my way back to this recording booth and we will be reunited here at Undersparked once again.
But you might have to put up with the fact that I'll have a new accent and that this will be how I talk from the rest of my life, okay? So you just have to accept it. But anyway, guys, we're at the end of the video. Thank you all so much for watching, commenting, and have a good one. Bye-bye!